you have to be able to get the blade's cutting direction in a known position, and that best known position is parallel to the table. Then you can do a lot of fancy stuff on the bandsaw. Hey, I'm Boggs, and I am not going to talk about drift today. I'm going to talk about the importance of working with and understanding a bandsaw's cutting direction. I've looked at a lot of other videos on this, and it seems like we're on the same page, but the discussion of drift stirs up controversy or something. What I want to talk about today is paying attention to what direction your blade is cutting in relative to the direction you're feeding stock into it. Now, ideally, you'll follow everybody's instructions and put the blade on the center of the wheel, or ideally, the back of the gullet should be pretty centered on the wheel. That should put your blade oriented parallel to the table, and it actually would be parallel to, on a 14-inch saw, parallel to the slot in the table. I had to add a slot to my table to have that function. There are holes to locate other jigs on here, but whatever you're doing, you want to be feeding your stock into the blade parallel to the cutting direction. Setting up a fence or for straight cuts, that's pretty straightforward. You're just going to put your fence parallel to the table, your slot, or whatever it is, but you want to put, so that should be also parallel to the cutting direction of your blade, which is the face of the beam of the blade. Where it gets a little bit hairier is when you're using fixtures that cut arcs. I've set up on the table this morning, I set up my circle cutting jig. This pin is adjustable in or out. It locks these two pieces together, which trap on this bird's beak here, each of these two bird's beaks. Quick and easy to adjust. I just measure the distance here to get whatever radius I want. And when talking about circles in my videos, I'm going to talk about radii, just like machinists and other engineers will talk about what the arc name is. It generally wears the name of the radius of that arc. The way this fixture works is I have to have a hole either in a spoil board like this, or if I can, a hole in the top, or excuse me, a hole in the part. I'll use this for cutting tabletops, a lot of different small arcs that I need. You saw a video recently where we were cutting parts using an arced fence. This is the fixture that I would use to make curved fences with. So what's tricky in setting up a fixture like this is that the center of your pivot point, however that is set up, and the same is true for an arced fence, it has a center point for that radius swings from. That point needs to be aligned on a line that would come from the back of the gullet, perpendicular to the saw's cut direction. Whether you want to call that by another word or not, I don't care. But the saw's cutting direction needs to be, is going to be perpendicular to the radial line here. So when I swing this through, if you can come in closely, you can see the blade is tangent to the arc I'm cutting. In other words, the distance in the front and the distance in the back to the plywood on this side of the cut is about the same. That's going to give me as good a cut as I'm going to get on this machine with this blade. And if I do that right, putting these back together should leave a nice joint regardless of where I'm oriented on that curve. If I'm off, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to make another cut, and I'm going to screw it up intentionally. Well, if I can find my, there we go. I'm going to scoot this down just a little bit. So I'm going to move this pivot point toward me a little bit. It's about 1 inch off. Now watch this cut. See how the tail is further from the wood than the front of the blade? I can make a cut because the teeth are curved and are wider than the belly or than the beam. But I'm not going to get as good a quality of cut as I got. And you can see I'm getting where I was going slower. The blade is rubbing here, and that's not the best way to get a really good smooth cut. You can tell, I don't know if the camera can pick up the difference in roughness of these two curves. I still get a pretty good curve, but it's not quite the same quality of cut. Depending on what I'm doing and what result I need, the importance of cutting true to the blade or true to the saw's cut or swinging true to the saw's cut becomes more or less important. I'm gonna do it again and screw it up some more. Now this is a brand new blade. A blade that has some wear on it. The kerf is going to be a little worn down, and it's going to be a lot more sensitive to not being true to this. A brand new blade has a wider kerf that hasn't worn yet, and it's going to be less responsive, like we saw just then, less responsive to how true I am to the cutting, or how true my feed direction is to the cutting direction of the saw. So now I'm almost 2 inches off kerf, and now look, you can already hear the saw rubbing. You can see it's a lot further off, and it's already, it's not wanting to cut. I'm putting the brakes on the blade because it's binding, and the blade is already leaning because it wants to cut this way relative to my feed direction. So I'm just going to slide this right in to where it's supposed to be, and now all is well. In my video the other day, I had to adjust my pin direction because it wasn't exactly square. Now, what I did the other day is I adjusted the pin about 1/4 inch forward because I was getting rubbing on the inside of the curve. I moved forward. It was moving backwards that caused this burning on the, well, this is not burning really, this is just rubbing the oil off the new blade. But with some wear, that would become, with some wear on the curve, that would start to become burning. So what's tricky with arc cutting is it's not as easy to set a radius point up that's exactly perpendicular to the saw's cut. The measuring methods are not as straightforward. You know, being able to put a square out here, I've got a 24-inch square that's long enough. The other day I was making a 40-inch radius. I don't have a square that's that long, so I had to extend, and then it gets a little iffy. So after a couple of trial cuts, I had to adjust the position of this. Now, depending on the complexity of your fixture, the importance of the position of this increases. I'm going to show you a more complex fixture. This is a fixture I've demonstrated before on a video, not how I set it up, but just the cutting of it. This week is another method for cutting chair seats. Generally I would clamp it down here, but I'm not going to do that for this video, and I'm not even going to turn the saw on. But basically there's a fence under here that positions this against the table edge, so that puts this in line with my cut every time, as long as I'm keeping my saw tuned up and the cut is parallel to the table. So I've got I've set up two slots here, this one and this one, that I use for fixturing cut guides or setup guides that get my fixture set up so that I'm cutting with the saw's cut direction. So with this fixture, there are screws here that I screw a blank to this face and raise the guard way up, and now I'm doing things that challenge the saw's ability to cut truly on a couple of levels. One is the fence is high, but it needs to be high to clear the part that goes on here. That means I've got less blade support, but I'm cutting arcs in different directions and then changing to a straight line. So the initial cut is I'm swinging from this pivot point until I hit that arc back here. Then I'm coming off of this pivot point, following a radius that's back here to cut the second curve of the S curve. Then once I come to my stop here, which I adjust depending on which part I'm making, now I'm entering into a straight cut. So I'm cutting from one direction, or rather swinging from one direction, swinging from the other direction, and then going straight in a single cut. If I haven't got this set up so that all of my movements are keeping the wood moving in line with the blade's cutting direction, I'm not going to have consistent parts. And if for this particular design, the parts have to be glue joint consistent. And that's why you really, in order to be able to do something like this, you have to be able to get the blade's cutting direction in a known position, and that best known position is parallel to the table. Then you can do a lot of fancy stuff on the bandsaw once you understand how to design the fixtures. But understanding the importance of always cutting in line with the blade is key to being able to design processes that allow you to make some more complicated parts. I hope that helps clarify cutting direction and ends my discussion on drift. Thanks.